A kind nurse cared for a veteran diagnosed with cancer in his final days, but over time the unexpected happened. It was a busy Thursday evening when Vicky clocked in for her shift at the hospice. The hum of quiet conversations mixed with the steady beeping of heart monitors filled the air. Nurses hurried down the hall, and the faint smell of disinfectant clung to the walls. Vicky had just gotten settled at the nurse's station, reviewing patient charts, when the emergency room doors burst open. A tall male nurse wheeled in an older man whose head lolled slightly to the side. His skin was ashen, his cheeks hollow, and he looked dangerously thin beneath the tailored suit that now hung loosely on his frame. "Patient's name is Ronald Peters," the nurse said, his voice clipped and professional. "Stage 4 cancer. No known allergies. Admitted for palliative care." Vicky's eyes flicked toward the man in the wheelchair. His silver hair was neatly combed back, but his face was pale and drawn. His lips were pressed together in a thin line, his expression hard and cold despite the weakness that clung to his body like a shadow. His hands rested limply on the wheelchair's armrests, but there was a quiet dignity in the way he held himself. Even as fragile as he looked, he had the presence of a man who was used to control, used to power. Vicky walked over, her clipboard pressed to her chest. She knelt beside the wheelchair so that her gaze was level with his. "Mr. Peters," she said gently, "my name is Vicky. I'm going to be taking care of you." Ronald's eyes barely flicked toward her. His mouth twitched, but he said nothing. His gaze drifted to the window, where the setting sun cast a soft amber glow across the room. Vicky stood and signaled to the orderly to wheel him toward a private room down the hall. The room was modest but clean, with soft natural light filtering through white linen curtains. A single bed sat by the window, and the furniture was simple. A small nightstand with a lamp, a padded chair in the corner, and a television mounted on the wall. As the orderly helped Ronald into the bed, Vicky busied herself with the chart. His medical history was extensive: years of hypertension, heart issues, and finally, the devastating diagnosis of terminal cancer. But there was more than just medical information there. Ronald Peters had once been a powerhouse in the business world, a millionaire who had built a car sales empire from the ground up. He was decorated for his service as a Marine, and yet there were no listed family contacts. No emergency numbers. No next of kin. Vicky's brow furrowed as she studied the empty fields on the chart. A man like Ronald shouldn't have been alone. When the orderly left, Vicky approached the bed and adjusted Ronald's blanket. "Is there anything you need, Mr. Ronald?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on the window, his expression unchanged. "Okay," Vicky said gently, giving his arm a light squeeze. "I'll be right here if you need anything." She settled into the padded chair and watched him for a moment. Ronald's breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling beneath the thin hospital blanket. His jaw was tight, his hands curled slightly over the edge of the blanket as though he was holding himself together by sheer will. Over the next few days, Ronald said very little. Vicky would come in every morning with his medication and a quiet smile. Sometimes she would sit with him while he ate. Other times she would simply adjust his pillows or help him sit up in bed. Ronald remained quiet, his responses short and clipped when he spoke at all. But he never asked for anything. One afternoon, Vicky came in to find Ronald sitting up slightly in bed, his eyes closed. Sunlight streamed through the window, warming his face. She sat beside him, adjusting his blanket where it had slipped down. "Mr. Ronald," she said softly, "would you like me to put on some music?" Ronald's eyes opened slowly, but he didn't respond. His gaze drifted toward the window again. Vicky hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small book. It was a collection of short stories she had been reading on her lunch breaks. "How about a story?" she suggested, her voice light. Ronald's eyes flicked toward the book and then away again. He didn't protest, so Vicky opened the book and began to read. Her voice was soft and even, the words filling the quiet room like a warm blanket. Ronald's eyes remained fixed on the window, but his hand relaxed slightly against the blanket. Vicky continued reading, her voice lulling and steady. After a while, Ronald's breathing slowed, and his eyes drifted shut. The next day, Vicky found him sitting up again, staring at the book she had left on the nightstand. She sat beside him and picked it up. "Shall we continue where we left off?" she asked. Ronald said nothing, but his gaze lingered on the book for a moment before he closed his eyes. Vicky smiled and began reading again. Days passed like this. Vicky would come in each morning, adjust his pillows, give him his medication, and then sit and read. Ronald never asked her to stop. He never asked for anything. But slowly, something began to shift. One afternoon, as Vicky sat reading, Ronald's hand twitched slightly on the blanket. She glanced down and saw that his fingers had curled toward her hand. Without thinking, she reached out and lightly touched his hand. His fingers tightened around hers. Vicky's heart swelled. "I know you're used to doing things on your own," she said quietly. "But you don't have to do this alone." Ronald's eyes opened. For the first time, he looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes were pale blue, sharp despite the weakness in his face. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Vicky smiled. "It's okay. You don't have to say anything." Ronald's eyes remained on hers for a long moment. Then he gave the smallest of nods. That night, Vicky sat by his bed long after her shift had ended. Ronald's breathing was steady, and his hand remained curled around hers even as he drifted to sleep. Weeks passed, and Ronald's condition remained stable. He didn't speak much, but Vicky noticed that he began following her with his eyes when she moved around the room. When she read to him, he listened. When she helped him sit up, he leaned into her touch. One afternoon, Vicky was sitting beside him when he spoke for the first time. "Thank you." Vicky's head snapped toward him. "What for?" Ronald's gaze softened. "For treating me like a person. Like I matter." Vicky's throat tightened. She squeezed his hand. "You do matter." Ronald's gaze held hers for a long moment. Then, slowly, his mouth curved into the faintest of smiles. From that day on, Ronald's walls began to crack. Vicky saw glimpses of the man beneath the hardened exterior, a man who had been wounded not by war or illness, but by abandonment and loss. Slowly, Ronald began to trust her. He started sharing bits and pieces of his life, his time in the Marines, the car business he had built from scratch, the wife he had loved and lost. And Vicky listened, because sometimes healing didn't come from medicine. Sometimes it came from being seen, from being heard. And Ronald Peters, for the first time in years, finally felt seen. It was a quiet afternoon in the hospice when Ronald sat up in bed, feeling a little stronger than he had in weeks. His back pressed against the slightly raised bed, and the sunlight filtering through the window gave the room a golden glow. The usual heaviness in his chest wasn't as suffocating today. The pain was still there, humming beneath his skin like a low current, but it was manageable. Manageable because of Vicky. She had been there every day, her soft voice and steady hands easing him through the worst of it. He wasn't sure when it had started. The trust, the quiet reliance. But now it was the only thing keeping him anchored. Ronald had learned to expect the light knock on the door each morning, the sound of her footsteps as she crossed the room, the soft rustle of her uniform as she sat down beside him. He had never asked for any of it, but she gave it anyway, patiently, kindly, without asking for anything in return. Vicky entered the room now, holding a small tray with a cup of tea. She smiled when she saw him sitting up. "Well, you're looking better today," she said as she set the tray down on the bedside table. Ronald smiled faintly. "Looks can be deceiving." Vicky chuckled softly. "Maybe, but sitting up is progress." She picked up the cup of tea and carefully handed it to him. Her fingers brushed against his briefly. Warm, steady. Ronald's hands trembled slightly as he took the cup, but he managed to lift it to his lips and take a sip. Vicky sat down beside him and watched him quietly. After a moment, Ronald lowered the cup and glanced at her. His brow furrowed slightly. "Why are you so kind to me?" he asked suddenly. His voice was rough and low, the question cutting through the comfortable quiet between them. Vicky's eyes softened. "Because everyone deserves to feel like they matter," she said simply. Ronald stared at her for a long moment. His blue eyes, once sharp and calculating, now held the quiet vulnerability of a man who had nothing left to lose. He hesitated, then set the cup down on the table. His hands remained in his lap, twisting slightly, as if he were trying to decide how much to say. After a moment, he sighed. "You don't know what kind of man I am." Vicky tilted her head. "Then tell me." Ronald's gaze dropped to his hands. His jaw tightened. "I wasn't always alone," he began. "I had a family, a wife, 2 kids." His voice was steady, but there was an edge of something bitter beneath it. "I built a business from nothing. Car sales. I was good at it too. Ruthless, some would say. But it paid off. I made my first million before I turned 35. Vicky listened quietly, her expression open and patient. "My wife, Eleanor, she was everything," Ronald continued, his voice softening when he said her name. She kept me grounded. She was the reason I even bothered to slow down enough to appreciate any of it. His eyes darkened. But I still miss too much. Too many late nights at the office. Too many business trips when I should have been home. He swallowed hard. Eleanor got sick. Pancreatic cancer. By the time we caught it, it was already too late. His voice cracked slightly. I was so busy running the business, trying to keep everything from falling apart, that I missed the signs. Vicky's heart tightened. She told me once, Ronald's gaze grew distant, that money couldn't fix everything. I didn't believe her. Thought I could handle it the way I handled everything else, with control, with strategy. His eyes filled with quiet anguish. I couldn't save her. Vicky reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. Ronald's lips pressed together. His knuckles were pale beneath her fingers. After Eleanor died, I threw myself into work. Built the business bigger than ever. I told myself that's what she would have wanted. But it wasn't about her. It was about the fact that I didn't know how to live without her. He took a shuddering breath. My kids were young. They needed me. And I failed them too. I was their physically board meetings, bank accounts, trust funds, but not in the ways that mattered. I thought money would make up for everything. I thought if I gave them enough, it would fix what was broken. Vicky's hand tightened around his. They grew up resenting me. Eleanor had been their anchor, and when she was gone, all they were left with was a man who knew how to close deals but didn't know how to say, "I love you," without it sounding like a business transaction. Ronald's eyes filled with tears. A few years ago, I started feeling off. I knew something was wrong. His hand brushed over his chest. When I got the diagnosis, I thought this was it. My last shot. He took a breath, steadying himself. I decided to test them. My kids. I told them I had lost everything. That the business was gone, the money was gone. I wanted to see if they would still care about me without the fortune attached. Ronald's mouth twisted bitterly. Do you know what happened? Vicky shook her head slowly. They left. His voice was flat. First it was my son. He stopped calling. Then my daughter followed. They disappeared like I had never existed. His gaze grew hard. I realized then that I had built everything on a foundation of sand. The money, the success, it meant nothing. When it was gone, there was nothing left holding them to me. Vicky's heart ached as she listened. She could see the years of regret etched into the lines of his face. The weight of it pressed down on his shoulders, making him seem smaller despite the strength that still lingered beneath his fragile frame. I came here because there was nowhere else to go, Ronald whispered. His gaze lifted to hers, raw and open. I didn't expect anything. And yet. He shook his head slightly. You sit here. Every day. You treat me like I'm worth something. Why? Vicky's eyes shone with quiet emotion. Because you were worth something, she whispered. Ronald's breath hitched. You didn't fail her, Vicky said softly. You didn't fail your kids either. His gaze darkened. How can you say that? Because you tried, Vicky said. You built a life. You loved them the way you knew how. And when it fell apart, you kept going. That takes strength, Ronald. It takes more strength than most people have. Ronald's eyes filled with tears. He blinked rapidly, but a single tear slipped down his cheek. Vicky reached up and gently wiped it away with her thumb. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, she whispered. For a long moment, Ronald didn't say anything. His hand curled around hers, his grip surprisingly strong despite his frailty. His chest rose and fell unevenly. Slowly, his shoulders relaxed, and the tension in his face softened. Vicky stayed beside him until his breathing evened out and his eyes began to close. His hand remained wrapped around hers as he drifted toward sleep. As Vicky sat there, her fingers wrapped around Ronald's thin but steady hand, she realized something remarkable had happened. The hard shell that Ronald had worn for years, decades, maybe, had begun to crack. Beneath it was a man who had spent his life building walls to protect himself from pain, only to realize that those same walls had kept him from feeling love, too. But now, sitting in this quiet room, with Vicky beside him, Ronald wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in years, Ronald slept peacefully. It was a dark and stormy night when Vicky sat by Ronald's bedside, her heart pounding with quiet dread. Rain lashed against the windows of the hospice, the howling wind rattling the glass panes. The dim bedside lamp cast a soft, golden glow over Ronald's frail form. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow and uneven. Each breath seemed like a struggle, a fight his body was losing with every passing second. Vicky's hand was wrapped tightly around his thin, trembling fingers, her thumb brushing gently over his knuckles. She had seen him weak before, but never like this. This was different. This felt final. Ronald, she whispered, her voice barely rising over the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. "I'm here. You're not alone." His eyelids fluttered weakly, and for a moment, Vicky wasn't sure if he would open his eyes at all. But slowly, his pale blue eyes flickered open, clouded with exhaustion yet still carrying that quiet strength that had always defined him. His lips parted as he tried to speak, but the effort seemed too much. Vicky leaned closer, brushing his silver hair away from his forehead. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything." But Ronald's lips curled into the smallest of smiles. His voice was hoarse, barely more than a breath. "Thank you," he rasped. His thin hand tightened around hers with surprising strength. "For reminding me how to live." Vicky's breath caught in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes as a knot of emotion tightened in her chest. He was so weak, so fragile, yet beneath it all, there was a peace in his expression that hadn't been there before. "You don't have to thank me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ronald's eyes remained open, soft and full of gratitude. His hand lingered in hers before his eyes slowly drifted shut again. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Vicky didn't move. She stayed there, sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands still holding his. She sat with him through the night. Hours passed in a quiet blur. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm in her heart, loud, chaotic, unforgiving. But here, inside this small room, there was only quiet. Only the sound of Ronald's breathing and the steady thrum of the rain against the window. At some point, Vicky's head dropped against the edge of the bed. Her eyes fluttered closed as exhaustion overtook her. But she never let go of his hand. The next morning, Vicky woke to the soft creaking of the door. She sat up groggily, her neck stiff from sleeping in such an awkward position. Ronald was still asleep, his chest rising and falling more steadily than the night before. His face looked different, less pale, more at ease. Dr. Morgan, the hospice doctor, entered the room with his clipboard. He glanced at Ronald, then back at Vicky with a faint frown. "How is he?" Vicky asked, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Dr. Morgan approached Ronald's bedside, pressing 2 fingers gently against his wrist to check his pulse. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the heart monitor. "His vitals have improved," he said slowly, a hint of confusion in his voice. Vicky's brow furrowed. "Improved?" Dr. Morgan nodded. "Not just improved. They're stable, stronger." He reached for his stethoscope and listened to Ronald's breathing, his frown deepening. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured. Vicky stood, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" Dr. Morgan pulled the stethoscope away and straightened. "We've been managing his pain, but there was no medical reason for his condition to improve like this. His body shouldn't be recovering. But it is." Dr. Morgan hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. It's not just that he's stable. His cancer markers have dropped significantly. It's as if his body has started to heal itself." Vicky's hand shot to her mouth. She looked down at Ronald, still sleeping peacefully, color returning to his cheeks. "Is he going to make it?" she asked breathlessly. Dr. Morgan hesitated. "I don't want to say it's a miracle," he said carefully. "But if this keeps up, he might have a chance." Vicky's legs felt weak beneath her. She sat back down at Ronald's bedside, her hand brushing his cheek softly. He stirred beneath her touch, his eyes fluttering open. "Vicky." His voice was stronger than it had been the night before. She smiled through her tears. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're getting better." Ronald's eyes softened. "Didn't think I'd make it through the night." "Neither did I." Her voice trembled. "But you did." Ronald smiled faintly. "Guess I'm not done yet." Over the next few weeks, Ronald's strength slowly returned. At first, it was small things. Being able to lift his cup of tea without his hand trembling, sitting up in bed without assistance. Then, gradually, more milestones followed. Vicky helped him sit up one afternoon, fluffing the pillows behind him. Ronald groaned slightly as he adjusted his weight. "Well, this is new," he joked. "What is?" Vicky asked, her eyes bright with quiet amusement. "Feeling human again." Ronald's smile deepened. "I almost forgot what it was like." "You're not done yet," Vicky said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Ronald's gaze softened. "Because of you." Vicky's heart squeezed painfully. "I didn't do anything." Ronald's hand found hers. "Yes, you did." One afternoon, Ronald was strong enough to sit by the window. Vicky helped him into a chair, draping a soft blanket over his lap. Outside, the spring sun filtered through the branches of the old oak tree in the courtyard. "You know," Ronald said, his voice stronger now, "I've been thinking a lot about my wife lately." Vicky sat beside him. "Yeah." Ronald's eyes softened. "She was everything to me. I thought when I lost her, I lost everything. You didn't lose everything, Vicky said quietly. Ronald turned to her. No, he agreed. Because of you. Vicky's eyes shimmered with tears. I'm not your daughter, Ronald. No, he said. But you feel like you are. It was a crisp spring morning when Vicky wheeled Ronald toward the entrance of the hospice. The sun was shining, casting golden light across the neatly trimmed lawn and the flowering cherry blossom trees that lined the driveway. A soft breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming flowers. Ronald's face, once pale and drawn, was now fuller, his cheeks touched with color. His silver hair gleamed in the sunlight, and there was strength in his posture that hadn't been there before. He was dressed sharply in a navy blazer, a crisp white shirt, and tailored slacks, a far cry from the hospital gown he had worn for so many months. You're ready, Vicky said softly as she maneuvered the wheelchair toward the waiting car at the curb. Her smile was warm and proud, but there was a bittersweet tug at her heart. Ronald was leaving. That was the goal, of course, to get him better, to help him reclaim his life. But the thought of not seeing him every day left a hollow ache in her chest. Ronald turned his head toward her, his eyes clear and calm. I never thought I'd be ready for this day, he said with a quiet smile. But I guess I have you to thank for that. Vicky laughed softly, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. I didn't do anything special. Ronald's gaze sharpened. You did everything. Vicky's hands rested lightly on the handles of the wheelchair as Ronald reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a long white envelope. He held it out to her. What's this? Vicky asked, hesitating before taking it. Her fingers trembled slightly as they brushed against his. Open it, Ronald said, his voice steady but gentle. Vicky frowned, slipping her finger beneath the flap and carefully opening the envelope. Inside was a crisp stack of legal documents. She scanned the top of the page, her brow furrowing in confusion. Then her eyes widened. This says I'm your next of kin? Her gaze lifted sharply to meet his. And half your estate? Ronald smiled softly. That's right. Vicky's heart began to race. I don't understand. Ronald reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. Vicky, when I was at my weakest, when I had nothing left, not even the strength to care if I lived or died, you were there. You never gave up on me. My own family abandoned me the moment they thought I was broke. But you. His eyes softened. You cared when you didn't have to. That doesn't mean you should give me half of your fortune. Vicky's voice shook. Ronald smiled. It's not about the money. It's about trust. It's about gratitude. Vicky's eyes brimmed with tears. I didn't do it for this. I know, Ronald said. That's exactly why I'm doing it. Vicky shook her head, her breath hitching as tears welled in her eyes. I can't accept this. You can, Ronald said firmly. And you will. Vicky's throat tightened as she stared down at the document in her hands. Her name was there, written so plainly, so officially, tied to a fortune she couldn't even begin to fathom. She wasn't even sure how much Ronald was worth, but that didn't matter. What mattered was why. Ronald squeezed her hand. You gave me something money could never buy. Your care, your time, your heart. I'm not giving you this because you need it. I'm giving it to you because you deserve it. Vicky's breath shuddered. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to steady herself. Ronald, it's not charity, Vicky, Ronald said softly. It's a gift. A thank you. Vicky knelt beside him, setting the papers carefully in her lap. I didn't do anything that any other nurse wouldn't have done. Ronald's gaze sharpened. No, that's where you're wrong. I've had money my entire life. I've seen how people treat me when they know I have it. My family, my so-called friends, they all disappeared when they thought the money was gone. But you treated me the same whether I had nothing or everything. Vicky's tears spilled over as Ronald's hand brushed her cheek. I didn't expect to live through this, Ronald continued. But I did, and that's because of you. Vicky's chest tightened painfully. Ronald, you gave me something more valuable than money. Vicky, Ronald said quietly. You gave me hope. Vicky's lips trembled as she shook her head. I don't need anything from you. I know, Ronald said with a small smile. That's why you deserve it. Vicky closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. But when she opened them, Ronald was still looking at her with that calm, steady gaze. The gaze of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. I can't promise I'll know what to do with it, Vicky said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ronald smiled. Then figure it out. Do something good with it. Help someone the way you helped me. Vicky let out a soft, shaky laugh. No pressure, huh? Ronald chuckled. No pressure. For a long moment, they sat there in quiet understanding. Vicky's fingers brushed lightly over the papers in her lap. She had spent so many nights by Ronald's side, listening to his breath, holding his hand through the pain. She had watched him at his lowest, stood by him when he had no one else. She had cared for him because it was the right thing to do, because her heart told her to. And now, Ronald was offering her more than just his gratitude. He was offering her a future. "I'm not sure what to say," Vicky whispered. "Say you'll take it," Ronald said. Vicky's eyes shimmered with tears as she nodded. "Okay." Ronald's hand tightened around hers. "Good." The car door opened, and the driver stepped out. Ronald's gaze lingered on Vicky. "I guess this is it." Vicky swallowed hard. "Yeah." Ronald's eyes softened. "I'm not going far, you know." Vicky smiled through her tears. "You better not." Ronald leaned in, and Vicky hugged him tightly, her arms wrapping around his frail but growing frame. He smelled of fresh linen and the faintest trace of cologne. "Thank you," Ronald whispered in her ear. "You don't have to thank me," Vicky whispered back. Ronald smiled as he pulled away. "That's why I will always be thankful." Vicky helped him into the car, her hand lingering on the door as he settled into the back seat. Ronald's hand lifted in a small wave as the car pulled away from the curb. Vicky watched it disappear down the drive, her hands tightening around the envelope in her lap. Her chest ached, but beneath it was something else, something warm and hopeful. Ronald had given her a gift. But more than that, he had given her a sense of worth that no amount of money could buy. And as she stood beneath the morning sun, Vicky knew that her life was about to change forever. It was a bright autumn morning when Vicky stood at the entrance of the new hospice facility, sunlight spilling across the sleek glass doors and the carefully landscaped flower beds. A soft breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of fresh paint and blooming roses. The name etched above the entrance in elegant gold lettering read, "The Margaret Bennett Care Center." Vicky's breath hitched as she traced the letters with her eyes. Margaret Bennett, Ronald's late wife. This place was more than a building. It was a tribute to a love Ronald never stopped honoring, even through his darkest days. Ronald stood beside her, looking stronger and healthier than he had in years. His tailored gray suit fit snugly, and there was a lightness in his face that hadn't been there when they first met. He smiled at Vicky, his eyes soft with gratitude. "This place exists because of you," Ronald said quietly. Vicky shook her head, a small smile touching her lips. "No," she replied. "It's because you chose to live." Ronald's smile deepened. He reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I wouldn't have made it without you." Vicky's heart swelled as she squeezed his hand back. "And I wouldn't have believed in myself without you." They stood quietly for a moment, soaking in the significance of the moment. Nurses and staff bustled inside the facility, their white uniforms bright against the polished floors. The place radiated warmth and care, a reflection of the journey they had both taken to get here. From the corner of her eye, Vicky noticed movement at the edge of the parking lot. Ronald's children stood there, his son and daughter shifting uncomfortably, their expressions a mixture of guilt and hesitation. Vicky's smile faded slightly as Ronald followed her gaze. "They came," Ronald said softly, a trace of disbelief in his voice. "Yes," Vicky said. Ronald's jaw tightened. "It took them long enough." "Maybe," Vicky replied. "But they're here now." Ronald hesitated, then nodded slowly. His gaze softened as he glanced at Vicky. "Do you think they'll stay?" Vicky smiled knowingly. "That's up to you." Ronald's eyes lingered on his children for a moment longer before he exhaled and turned back toward the hospice. "Are you ready?" he asked. Vicky looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the fragile man she had first cared for, but a man who had rediscovered strength and hope. "Always," she answered with a smile. Ronald's arm looped through hers as they stepped toward the glass doors together. For the first time, they were no longer patient and nurse. They were family. As the doors opened and they stepped into the bright new beginning before them, Vicky knew that this was only the start of the life they were building together. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Ronald's humor returned. He teased Vicky about her reading choices. She teased him about his stubbornness. "You're not going to get out of physical therapy by charming the nurses," Vicky warned him one morning. "Who, me?" Ronald grinned. "I'm an old man. What trouble could I possibly cause?" Vicky gave him a knowing look. "Don't test me, Ronald." Ronald chuckled. His eyes softened. "I haven't laughed this much in years." Vicky smiled. "Then I guess you're doing pretty well." "I think I am." Ronald's gaze steadied on hers. "And it's because of you." Vicky shook her head. "You fought for this, Ronald." You wanted to live. I didn't want to live, Ronald admitted. Not before I met you. Vicky's chest tightened painfully. Then I guess we both saved each other. Ronald smiled. His hand found hers. Yeah, I think we did. And as the sunlight streamed through the window, Ronald smiled, a real smile, full of life and quiet gratitude. And for the first time in years, he felt whole.